Thank you. Our respects, condolences, and prayers with all the families who have lost lives today. Uh, for the evening, today we have a talk on Artic routes, resources, and services by a noted expert, Dr. Vijay Sakhuja. These talks are a part of the Maritime Knowledge Lecture Series conducted by Center for Maritime Economy and Connectivity at RIS, and these talks are there to fulfill the vision of Maritime Amritkal Vision 2047 in various dimensions. And Artic is a very important subject. Dr. Vijay Sakhuja is a strategic expert in this direction. He's written 2 books, especially on Artic. He is a naval officer, an MPhil and PhD from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. We also have an eminent expert from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Joshi, who's from the School of Environmental Studies. Professor Joshi has also done various projects related to Artic in collaboration with the European Union on sustainable nature use in Artic and the high mountainous areas. We are fortunate to have these 2 experts today who will be dwelling on the Artic politico-strategic dynamics, the blue economy, climate change, and the related aspects of resources and services at the Artic. So I'll not stand between you and the speaker. May I now request Dr. Vijay Sakhuja to start his talk, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sheshesh. Well, at the outset, ladies and gentlemen, for me, it's a kind of a delight that I've come to Delhi. I am in Bengaluru, and I was hoping to spend my what we call as academic session break at the university, and then promptly Dr. Sheshesh said, well, there is an opportunity, would you like to take this on? And I, having sat in this very room many years ago, attending several seminars, I said it's like homecoming. Thank you very much. CMEC, RIS, India Habitat Center, it's a pleasure to be here. Well, he asked me, what is it that I would like to speak? Because we are now at the university, that's the Reva University. We are talking about, it's a tech university, so we have now started slowly moving into liberal arts, liberal sciences. We are talking about things like digital humanities. We are talking about generative geopolitics. So variety of new issues which are coming in for the students, and that's an exciting place. And within that broader context, I said, let me take on a geography which I'm quite familiar with, in the sense that, not that I've lived very long there, but then I've spent some time in the Arctic Circle, just about that, Tromsø, having attended several events. And I said, let me recall Arctic, and having done some work, 2 publications, and now I felt a little armed, and I said, let me talk about this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the issue today is routes, resources, and services. You would notice it is purely in terms of economics, that market part of it. But I will not disappoint you. There will be a small little element of matters geostrategic, because they also, today they coalesce, whether geoeconomics, geostrategic, or geoeconomics. I think they all move around together in some form or the other. One takes a dominant discourse, the other one sits back, and then suddenly the resources become important, and then we keep switching over there. One is tempted to go back to the good old atlas we used to have in the school days. I think it was 18 or 19 page stuff. We would talk about the oceans, etc. And just to get you back, they get the canvas going or the geography going, I thought it will be useful to put this out, in the sense that, of course, it's a harsh area. We all know about it. I mean, it's in the sense that hardly anybody goes in those many terms. Mysterious, dangerous, and then we have this Arctic 8 countries who are around it. And I think this infographic tells you all. You've got a very interesting thing, Arctic Circle. Then you're talking about where the tree line is. This is all going back to our days of geography, school days. We will talk about where the conifers, et cetera, would be. And of course, the dominant actor in that region is, of course, Russia. 24,000 kilometers is a long, long one. And surely it does, it does wield that kind of a power in the sense that it is there. You can see it, you can feel it. And other countries, of course, they acknowledge that it is there, but then they also play around. Well, kind of a different kind of a geopolitics, diplomacy, environment issues. I wouldn't disappoint our chair for the session in the sense that environmental issues are very, very important over there. What I intend to do is talk about just about 3-4 trends and give you an idea before I get into how it is all shaping up. And it is so dynamic a place that things happen on a daily basis in some form or the other, whether it is the dominant discourse or geostrategic. Like yesterday, the United States said, along with the Arctic countries, the NATO members, that we are going to conduct major exercises. The Russians, the big demon or the big elephant in the room, the Russia. So, or sometimes it's economics. We are just about starting, let me put it this way, today is 12th, 18 days from now, first of the ships would sail. And the moment we get into month of July, we'll say, oh, what next? Who's going to send cargo? What kind of cargo? I'm waiting for my cargo. Which port is now going to be absolutely primed to get me my cargo coming in with oil, gas, etc., etc. We'll talk about that. Routes opening up, exciting times, economic opportunities, but then with those opportunities, I think there are challenges which come in a variety of form, telling us to be aware of what is going to be. Are we moving into the Arctic too fast? That's a big question. Can we leave it that way? No, I think we have crossed that point of no return. It's a given that Arctic ice is going to be melting at a rapid rate. We're going to see something, a clear passage that I think the mariners will, I think it'll be a delight for them to sail through this particular geography. It'll be fascinating. Of course, I'll briefly touch on strategic importance. First trend, ladies and gentlemen, sea ice extent declining. Mean sea surface temperatures, again, warming up. Sea levels are rising. Volume, greenhouse gases. I think that's a loop of sorts. Warming, global warming, greenhouse gases. Again, this is the kind of ozone and the greenhouse gases joining up together. It is a difficult place. It is not coming back, as I said, point of no return. We have gone past that. Then, of course, with some statistics in terms of temperature ranked second warmest since 1900. The last 9 years are very warm. Summer 24 across the Arctic was the wettest. Rain. Very interesting. And perhaps this will probably, when you look at this particular infographic, fires in the Arctic, unbelievable. It's drying. And of course, the greenhouse gases, as I mentioned to you about, I think that is the fascinating part of the whole thing over there. So you have this massive trend which is going on, a new geography, a new set of things. Some of the areas which were covered under the firm frost, I think in some areas, they are emerging as greener pastures. Agriculture is going to be coming up. That's the new geography in the Arctic Circle we are talking about. Well, summarize, if you see the small little infographic on to your right, top one, look at the way it is from 79, when they started to collect data and record it in those many terms, you find the decline is taking place in terms of the sea ice extent. And the left one, you can see how it is shrinking, median line, and there are the etc. you can see from 1991 to 2020. So a lot of data is now available to understand exactly, is it melting or not? Yes, surely it is melting. Second trend, of course, great opportunity for the shipping world. Great ships are going to sail. But of course, they have to be of a particular class, of a particular kind. You just don't take a ship over there. It has to be a polar class, as the International Maritime Organization necessitates this, demands this, so that this area remains free of accidents in those many terms. They should sail safe. Now, you have the red one, the Northern Sea Route, very popular. I'll talk about it a little later. Then the green one. These are motorable, if I may use the word motorable. The mariners would understand it, that it is motorable, in the sense that what we are going to be looking at, again, I've got the next infographic to share with you. The central route, the blue one, will open. It's opening up. More shipping. And those of us who've been at sea would say, what a wonderful place. Lots of ships to look at. A lot of things to look at. Fascinating variety of ships, the kind of structure that they have. You have a figure which is coming on data telling us 2015 to 2040, when the ice would be about 4 feet thick. What you see is a lot of red in the first infographic on on to your left, and then if you see hardly anything on to your right, I think that's the shape of things. By about 2060, a long way to go, 35 years, but then that is how it will look like. More shipping, more ships, more movement, and it's an opportunity. It's also a challenge, as I said. Sometimes the nature tells us, don't play with us, don't play with the nature. But then here, probably Anthropocene part of it, you find that you are, even if you are not playing with the nature, or you have pushed that far, it has happened. Is it man-made? Very difficult to say. We must build a lot of empirical evidence. This is purely man-made. At the same time, is nature also looking that good old ice age back? Is it coming, or we are getting out and we'll have another ice age coming back later? So it is a process. But suffice to say, you would notice that by about 2060, it will be fantastic to sail through. This is the driver. Ladies and gentlemen, 14,000 kilometers. I'm a mariner, so I have not used the word nautical mile, but I'll keep it to because it's easily understood. But you look at 23,000 kilometers compared to 14,000. And for shippers, most important is, where do I cut costs? Where do I get my dollar? Where I'm going to save? Where are my profits? For him, the shipper, it is, where is my profit? Have I saved or not? That's why he's in the business. But then he's also these days conscious of the fact that there are issues. After all, this is his livelihood. He would like to look at things from an environment point of view. After all, he's also bound by some international regulations. And also got a small little inset over there in terms of dollar cost. It takes from, how the costs are varied. But because there's too much to talk about these issues, I'll move to another issue. Maybe we can but this is the figure I have about 2024. It's a very nice and very fascinating infographic. Not made by me. I picked it from, and I must give credit to the person. It's coming from, I think, Sputnik. They shared it. Nord University. Yes, it's come from there. You can see what kind of cargo is moving. Bulk is crude oil, bulk cargo, containers, others, ballast. Now, you also note a very interesting date written there, 28/11/2024. This is 2 days before when the voyages will end. It's not safe. Ice has come back. And in those many terms, we talk about a passage when we say July 1 to November 30th is a good time to set sail. This is the time we are looking at. And 25th of May, that is last month, 196 applications from foreign flags were there with the Russians. After all, Russians, as I said, 24,000 kilometers, their coastline, services in terms of search and rescue, variety of things that they support, particularly in the context of search and rescue. And over and above, the icebreakers. I'll come to that a little later. So we have some kind of statistics from 2025. We'll go to almost about 238 million tons, that kind of a stuff. But then this is how we look at things in terms of the routes. Well, we are all familiar. West is tightening economic sanctions against Russia, right? Shadow fleet we are all familiar with, right? And we feel that a large number of shadow fleet ships would be making their way into the Arctic. And this time the numbers could go up. It's a positive trend or positive report coming from Russia. That is going to be a very, very happy place. Well, what my trend number 3 is riches. We are talking about $35 trillion of untapped oil and gas. Huge it is. But, ladies and gentlemen, it will come at a cost. Here we are moving towards green energy. We are back to hydrocarbon. Where will it happen? How will drive it? There is coal also which is being mined. I'll talk about that a little later. The challenges. Why go and mine? What for? Is it so easy that I just go to somewhere in Bihar and say, okay, I'll start digging up and I get coal, or for that matter, iron ore? It is not so simple. But then the trend is, that's the kind of riches that we are talking about. Abundance. Again, it's a treasure trove in those many terms. You have, besides oil and gas, you're talking about, base metals, precious metal, ferrous, energy, special hydrothermal. I mean, you name it. And not to forget, ladies will be very happy, diamonds. They're there. You don't have to worry about artificial diamonds. They're going to come from the Arctic. Well, this is kind of an idea about how the cargoes are laid out. You would see the bulk is crude oil, 63%. There's a small little figure called containers, if you see 6%, coal 10%. But then container traffic, I'll come back to this, container and oil and gas, when I do a comparison of the two partners for this purpose. It's very difficult over there to mine. I think what they say is the cost of mining is too high. Shipping, as I said, just about 6 months, July 1 and 30th November, that's the time we are talking about. Permafrost, I mentioned to you, greenhouse gases is another issue. Swarms, they come up. The melting leads them to swarm. What about the road connectivity? That's a very, very big issue over there. Icebergs, of course, they bring their own challenges. Not to forget the polar bears. After all, they become very symbolic in those many terms, and temperature during winters can be -50. I think it's too harsh a geography or a space in which to go for mine. I think it requires a lot of courage. Maybe it's just, we see mining going on, and there is also a pressure from the people themselves, the Inuits. They themselves are not very happy about it. It's not that just go and start digging over there. You have to look at the people. The communities, for them, it's a big, big challenge. They're, I would say, unhappy about it. Then, of course, you have shipping coming in, variety of shipbuilding is taking place, more ports will come up, and if you see, bulk of it is Russia. So, is the king. Where one can easily say it, king of the Arctic in those many terms. Let me move on. It's building about 16 deep water ports and, of course, 10 Arctic search and rescue stations. You just don't give a passage. 196 ships have applied for it, and what do I do with them? I have to give them a cover in terms of search and rescue. We have, there was a very fascinating infographic, and there it said the number of accidents which have been taking place. It's scary in those many terms. How do you reach up? You need another, for a search and rescue, the helicopters, weathered kind of conditions are there, the sea ice, etc. You need another set of icebreakers to take this rescue vessel. So there are huge number of challenges. And you can see very nice pictures. Murmansk is one of them here. You can see how difficult it is. The port is not looking, hardly you could walk. Well, this is actually at the heart of the economic activity in the Arctic. You can see again, Russia, that's the fleet, Canada a few, US a few, and then now partnerships coming up. As a matter of fact, the US Coast Guard is now thinking about, because they are the ones who are going to be getting into their part of the Arctic, and that is where they're looking at what kind of search and rescue we offer them, what kind of vessels we would require. So they are also getting into getting their own, what we would call icebreakers. I believe we have amongst us a few members from the shipping companies. Yes. And I was asked that, what about the crew? You may bring, ships, you talk about mining, but where is the crew? It is a harsh geography, ladies and gentlemen. It is not easy to be working on the ship. You require a different kind of a training, both mentally and physically. They must be proficient. So the Polar Code came about in 2016. 2017 was up for ratification. And here they have talked about, what kind of design of the ship, construction, what kind of class. They call it polar class vessels. There will be equipment needed, operational, training, search and rescue. You name it, and it is all there. And how do you get in? There are already now in companies, for that matter, academies which are coming up. You have Admiral Makarov Sumis, that's in St. Petersburg. Then you have Admiral Nevelsky, this is in, I think, Vladivostok. And then you have Novi Kontas, that's in, I think, Riga. And there are several others. I can't list the whole lot of them. For them, there are opportunities in this. This is a new world. You have to be a specialist. You have to learn these skills. And of course, sometimes they offer you online courses also. So that's another opportunity for you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, so much of bounty, and it cannot be divorced from geopolitics. There are bound to be geostrategic issues. They're going to, as if, you see this infographic, we are talking about military bases, oil and gas reserves, minerals, and not last but not the least, rather, disputed boundaries. That means both on land and at sea, under the UNCLOS. So it is a kind of let me say, a lethal mix of geopolitics, geoeconomics, national interest, minerals, mines, people, everything. And not to forget, they invest the people themselves. It's something like a geography which is waiting to explode. As I said, we have gone past the point of no return. And this is where it would require, Arctic would require a management of a different kind, because the geography is different. The national interests, how do they pit against the so-called global issues such as climate change, warming, ice melting? There is an intimate relationship, or rather linkage, between what happens in the Arctic happens in the Himalayas. They call it is the third pole. So if you really start looking at it, to me, when I look at the Arctic and I say, it's not very far. If I'm on the lee side, this side of the Himalayas, right, and at the base, I say, oh, Arctic is not very far, and go back, still you get, the Siberian cranes coming and flying into Chilka Lake, right? That also you would recall. That's how we fondly looked at the birds as such, right? So here it is, we're going to see a combination. It requires management, a very sophisticated management, but the current situation, climate as such, probably, I dare say, we are not in a good, comfortable position as yet. But then I hope we always have to be optimistic. Maybe somewhere things will change. It'll come in handy. Arctic could be much more for the purpose of humanity. Well, these are my three actors. And I found this infographic very fascinating. It says it all. I don't have to really speak anything about it. And of course, President Trump is at the back and he says, hang on, what you guys are up to? It says it all. China says, I'm a near Arctic state. Now, China, Beijing's understanding of word near is not really understood. How far? He says, I'm there. And sure enough, they are there. In everything and anything. So this is, and those of us who follow geopolitics would say, okay, this is a new block which is coming up. We'll call it the CRINC, the China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. We've seen that during the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So a CRINC block is coming up, which is again going to look at a kind of a NATO, which is again in kind of a turmoil of its own, right? But then that's where how geopolitics is going to impact on this geography. A bit on China. It's a fascinating country. Of course, it's turning the whole world order into its own convenience, the way it wants it to be built. As a matter of fact, finding itself, power transition. And you start studying China from, I think, hundreds of domains. The more you get into it, you find more and more. It's unraveling each time. It's like peeling the onion. One more. Okay, I've got this also. I've got that also into it. Right. Here it is and that infographic again, if you see, the two of them bring their ships in. He needs LNG and he needs containers. I'll talk about this later. But then he calls it Polar Silk Road. We talked about the Silk Road. Good old, we've been talking about. Then for the sea, they call it the Maritime Silk Road, right? The oceanic space. They're talking about this as the so-called the Polar Silk Road. Geoeconomic arm of China's Arctic strategy. Generate political and strategic influence. Very interesting. The largest embassy they built in Greenland. Now, after Mr. Trump, when he went on to threaten Greenland, the Greenlanders went on, Chinese, where are you? Can you come and invest? And in that invest, what will happen? The kind of geoeconomic, geostrategic tensions. Europeans are very unhappy about it. So they set up in 2023 a joint working organ, as they call it, to develop the Northern Sea route that's connecting the Arctic. Look at the ambition, the way the Russians are looking at Arctic, Baltic, touching into the Persian Gulf, and then into the Indian Ocean. So we are already reaching up from the Indian Ocean as far as St. Petersburg through the international north-south corridor. And now St. Petersburg to Murmansk, canal network, what kind of network they will build? Of course, it will be multimodal transport, containers offloaded. It comes at the moment you switch container from one mode to the other, it costs. Costs in the sense, both in terms of transportation, in terms of time. Obviously, the goods landed at, say, Murmansk coming in from, say, the warmer waters in the Indian Ocean, of course, they're going to cost more. What about us? Where are we? It's a very fascinating stuff. You know, we hadn't reached up the Arctic immediately. We first went to Antarctic. I think it's a fascinating story for us for the past, how many? 46 years we've been in it. So we started the Antarctic program. Great advancements, achievements have been, we set up our centers over there, research centers. I think the focus was on science. And that paid off very well. That encouraged them, as a matter of fact, based on that experience, that the Indians thought, of course, why not towards the Arctic? And that's how we did. National Center for Antarctic and NCAOR at Goa, I think they've done a great job. They've contributed immensely to our understanding of polar studies from the science point of view. And it's again something that when you now look at science today and the politics of science, or science and politics, either way, when you twist these words, you find different answers. I think now the science is, yes, they've done a great job. Let us now start looking at this geography. 50 expeditions. We also, of course, before that, you know, Dakshin Gangotri, Maitri, Bharati, and of course at Svalbard we have Himadri. So far, great story, a successful story. And over 50 scientific expeditions. Post-Antarctic successes, as I said, India began to look to the Arctic. 2007, it established Himadri at Spitzenberg. 2012, India joins the Arctic Science Council, becomes an observer. I think that's where the takeoff has started. And that is where we find that as a scholar, as a student of this particular geography, I could see Arctic resonating in the corridors of South Bloc. There was this Ministry of External Affairs thinking about it. There was this Ministry of Defense talking about it. Then, of course, this spread into Ministry of Shipping, Port Transport, Commerce. Everybody now started talking about it. Of course, Ministry of Earth Sciences remains the dominant discourse, because science is, well, that's what we've talked about all along during our platforms, wherever they got the opportunity. Science, science, and science. So by 22, it took a little longer for us. 22, we get our Arctic policy, India and the Arctic building a partnership for sustainable development. So the very fact that you added sustainable development, that so-called environment consciousness was evident in our thinking at the policy level. Of course, it comes out, you know, there are missions laid out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all available on the net. If you really want to pursue this subject, you can read there. And then there are 6 pillars. And I've just taken one, transportation and connectivity, because the organizer, CMEC, is more keen on what is routes, resources, and connectivity. So you have resources, oil and gas, as I explained, minerals and metals, food. I didn't talk about it all along. We have a very fascinating infographic I couldn't include. The number of fishing vessels going into the Arctic during these months, as I call July to November, is phenomenal. That means there is something there. That's what takes them there. Earlier it used to be, you know, whaling was banned then because it had actually been destroyed. But then now it's been, for that matter, sustainable fisheries, sustainable in terms of, you know, SDGs, Goal 14, all those things are coming in. And then you find the traffic, majority of the traffic runs is in the form of these guys, the fishermen. I think, again, fishermen also have to be bold to be going into that difficult, harsh area. But then they do a great job. So on the road side, we find shipping, shipbuilding, and crew. Now, I talked about all these broadly, but then let me move on. But then, ladies and gentlemen, I must also go back to the mandate of CMEC. your center, where you talked about, of course, in your initial remarks, you talked about the Maritime Vision 2030 and the Maritime Amrit Kal 2047. Let us see how does the Arctic policy dovetails into Vision 2030 and then into this Amrit Kal. I see a kind of a seamless movement which is taking place. It is in its infancy as of now, but then it is getting its feet around, as a mariner I would call it, getting its sea legs in those many terms. Yes, there is something, and it's fascinating. This is how probably it would be a good idea. You have a policy, very clear-cut defined for this geography. You're talking about a larger vision called 2030, and thereafter we are talking about 47, Amrit Kal. I think they fit in very, very well. I'll just talk about two countries, I think, where I find, and I'm hoping that, CMEC would take this as the initiative to say, how does the whole idea about the vision, the 47, the 30, and the contemporary policy. Russia offers a very fascinating kind of an example. It needs to be built up, through a policy framework or whatever the center decides on that. Few years, just not very long ago, Prime Minister announced Vladivostok to Chennai. I still remember 1996 when we were going for the first time in OVL, then OVL is ONGC Videsh Limited, right? They went into Siberia for exploration. Only one consignment came from Vladivostok carrying oil, crude oil. 1996, I recall writing about it, came to New Mangalore. After that, it was a total silence. I didn't understand, but then later we realized that they were exploring and selling it there off the stocks, etc., there itself managing the resources. But then now, suddenly you see there is a kind of an expression of interest. So Vladivostok to Chennai, I think you can call it another expressway, of sorts, as we will call it, a corridor of sorts, right? So it is opening it, it's going to dovetail into the India's thinking, how India plugs into the Northern Sea route. Go back to my earlier slide when I said 14,000 kilometers from Vladivostok coming down to Rotterdam. That's how the circle then we were talking about. Then 23, so the warmer waters we were talked about. So what has happened into it? So 24, 29, last year, when Prime Minister Modi was there in Moscow with President Putin, they went on to talk about a lot of issues, trade, energy, mining, manpower, maritime transport, etc., etc. Probably, I think, is the construction of non-nuclear icebreaker and an ice-class ship in Indian shipyard was something that excited me a lot. I think now it's time. The so-called the Arctic is now familiar to the corridors of South Block, right? They are understanding it. This is what they want to work on. Then also India started negotiating with Far Eastern Shipping Company, FESCO, for container transportation. Costs are high, still pretty high, right? But then, as the volumes increase, the costs come down. More shipping, the volumes are there, then it comes down. Logistics, of course, very important. They talked about training of personnel, participation in international programs and projects in the polar region. That is Russia. So that is one kind of an actor of the larger, the king as a king of the Arctic, where we find that there is an opportunity. And India, Russia, New Delhi, Moscow, I think they talk a lot about this geography. There is one opportunity. And this is how it all fits in terms of our Arctic policy, the vision, and the Amrit Kal. My second kind of an excitement comes in form of Norway. This has just happened last a few days ago, right? Our minister was there, and a slew of agreements which have taken place. Joint feasibility study of operationalizing the Northern Sea route. Fascinating. What you see inset, that picture over there, the top one, is of 2013. It has taken us 12 years to reach the picture which is down below. But never too late. We've taken our time, policies come out. So I find it's a more kind of a structured and a very, very seasoned way. How do you want to take this geography into your broader thinking about, as India rises, it's got distant vision to talk about, and then Arctic fits in. It has taken time, but I'm pretty happy about it. So they're going to collaborating on R&D in Arctic shipping, construction of a polar research vessel, which we've been all the time thinking about, the first picture of 2013. So now we see it, it is going to be there. Advancement in Arctic navigation technologies, safe and sustainable shipping, not to forget the crew, our friends, and Sagar Mein Samman through seafarer training, polar navigation, maritime cybersecurity. These are the issues on the platter. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think these two, Russia and Norway, are a very, very important part of our larger Arctic policy to begin with, and many more. Finland, Canada, as things improve with Canada, I guess, right, we'll become much more, get engaged with them. Let me conclude. I call it white El Dorado. I'm sure several of us have seen Mackinac Gold, right? Here we see white El Dorado. I call it riches, abundance, opportunities. Of course, it will come at a cost. Let me be upfront on that. And not to forget, we'll have to be familiar. While we pursue these, we'll have to be looking at geoeconomic, geopolitics, geostrategic issues. They will go. It's like, I call these three as monkey on my back. I can't get rid of it. They'll be there. Of course, Arctic fits into India's larger growth vision, and it positions itself well. The Arctic policy, these three, as I said, I think they need to coalesce. They've got to work together. White economy, I label it, it's fashionable these days to give color to the economy. The green economy. And then we came from the oceanic domain, the blue economy, 24 trillion. I'm talking about a white economy, right? Which is again, runs into trillions of dollars, unexplored. We don't know much about it, right? And then I think it's an opportunity for our business forums. I would urge literally the FICCI, the CII, the ASSOCHAM to start sending business delegations there. They have an Arctic business forum there. So I think it's time to step in. Finally, I think CMEC, RIS, you'll have to start looking at UArctic. It's a consortium of universities where lots of people are there. It costs a small little amount to be there, but then you get to know a lot what is happening in that area. And you can push your agendas, whatever way, through intellectual debates, discourses, ideas, the policy that you want, through this UArctic. Is a very, very important platform for researchers. Finally, bad habit of academics to promote their books. Two of my books, written quite some time ago. I don't want you to buy, they're expensive, though. But then, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It was a pleasure, delight to speak to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such enlightening remarks and full coverage of Arctic from polar sea route to the white economy and everything. We have a host of experts in the audience from the MSc Services Shipping Company. Captain Sureen Narang is there. We also have a noted expert or somebody from Moscow, Dr. Rameshwar Singh. He's busy writing down something. He's come from Moscow. And we also have Rear Admiral Prasanna from the Navy and a host of other professors from JNU and other places. So before we go on to the audience, may I now request Professor Joshi to give his remarks, his scientific outlook on these possibilities, what was being talked about, because he's already worked on the scientific aspects of the possibilities, so he'll enlighten with this.
Namaskar and good evening to all of you. And it is indeed an absolute pleasure and honor to be with Dr. Vijay Sakhuja ji and listening to such a mesmerizing talk. I don't know why did you stop, but with such a wonderful content, giving a complete picture in many of the aspects, and quite thought-provoking. And I must compliment RIS to taking this very important topic and generating a discussion around this, and that is much needed, and probably institutions like RIS only can do such kind of things. So many thanks for having this. Now, I'm a very classroom boy, so and a typical ecologist trying to understand how environment is looked at. So generally when you look at climate change, there are two very distinct perspectives. One is in a geological time frame, and at times if you talk to geologists, So they will say, no, climate change is not exactly happening. It is just a phenomena in such a geological time scale. That could be true, but given the time scale wherein humanity has seen things and the rate of changes which are taking place around, so then that gives us a notch, No, there is something else which is happening and which is beyond the comprehension of geological time scale. And this is not, I am saying this, if you look at researchers across the world, they have repeatedly given evidences onto that, right from the pre-industrial period till date, the kind of variations which you are looking at in terms of carbon dioxide, in terms of temperature, and in terms of the way resources are being changing. So there is a truth. And IPCC, right from its AR4, when assessment report 4 came, and then onwards with AR5 and 6, it has further certified this and given whole range of evidences which are around us. So we should trust that such kind of things are changing, and these are changing in much faster rate than that of whatever humanity has imagined. Then there is another aspect, one is globally, and people who are experts in international relations, they will be able to support me, the kind of global fragmentation which is taking place, and the kind of environmental and climatic crises which are there. When you superimpose these two, so some of the hotspots come. And Arctic appears to be one of the hotspots wherein international geopolitical fragmentation and environmental crisis, they all are fitting together very nicely. And that is what the concern is. And as I said, as a classroom boy, if somebody asks me what is Arctic, a frame, if I try putting it, North Pole, intense snow, and then you have snow bear, igloos, all those kind of things. When cartography I try to look at, I don't see any political map over there. I don't see any physiographic map over there. A bit of relief could be probably one should be able to analyze. But given climate change on the top of that, probably cartography has to rework on these things. Entire set of maps which will be depicting this region, that will change. And that will change just not in terms of our understanding, rather in terms of the activities which are taking place over there. So, Dr. Sakhuja, he mentioned about so many things. He mentioned about climate, he mentioned about commerce, he also mentioned about security at some point. To me, the concern is sustainability. When you have such a huge amount of resources which are over there, how are we going to handle those? It is perfectly fine. Canada is there, Russia is there, and by the law of distance and displacement, probably China is much closer. So the concern for me is the question of sustainability. And one of the Sustainable Development Goals tells us about responsible production and responsible consumption. So shall we be able to do that? And given the way resource-centric strategies are there globally, and the way, especially when you look at the resource consumption patterns which are there at the West, shall we be able to bring this adjective of sustainability to the resources which are over there? That is probably the larger question to me. And if at all you are looking at it, so then there comes environmental justice, equity, or justice to the indigenous community. Though scattered, though in a very small amount, but somewhere from the environmental perspective, I would like to see this. This just not needs courage. It needs a very high degree of sensitivity. Sense of understanding what there is, how one will be able to utilize that. One of the models could be you simply go over there, extract it, use it, say that it is needed for the economy, it is needed for the humanity. Or probably the other pathway could be the philosophies which we talk about in terms of sustainable development goals, sustainable development, we show experiment over there. And that would be needing innovations. That would be needing a different way of thinking. I don't know, house stands for what. But people who think the way I am thinking, probably everybody will say, we need to develop a sustainable model over there. Resources are there, that is perfectly fine. It is just not gasoline, it is natural gas, it is minerals, it is diamonds, whatnot. But can we develop a sustainable model of utilizing such type of resources? Strategically, that positioning is very good. That is perfectly fine that our concerns are about who will be taking care of that land. But as an environmentalist, I would like to see how we'll be taking care of the resources which are over there. And that stands as a question to me. And for that, probably we just not need research, we need interconnected research. And the way we had shown in Antarctica, whether it is Maitri or Bharti, we have taken some initiatives in Arctic also through Himadri. We need to repeat certain kind of things. And the last 3-4 slides, what he presented, the way India is having vision towards Arctic. Probably the kind of leadership which we have today, and at least in the discourses of climate change, I can say it very loudly and with a high degree of confidence, whether it was Glasgow and the following COPs. India has shown way in multiple aspects while talking about climate change, while talking about sustainable development, while talking about initiatives, what we call typically NDCs, the kind of commitments which we have put forward. I think India has a fair chance to demonstrate in this front as well, the kind of leadership which we are showing, the kind of concerns which we have shown. And I'm quite optimistic. I did raise many of the concerns, but given the kind of policy or the kind of strategy which we have towards, whether you call it life mission or you talk about any other aspects of not phasing down, rather phasing out of fossil fuels. So somewhere strategically we are thinking in the right direction. And it simply doesn't come today, rather it is the culture from where we have come. So nations like us, it could be small island countries, it could be very, those which are not there on the cartographic display, but they matter a lot. Probably with such type of associations, along with Russia, Canada, or any of the nations, we should be able to take the mission of sustainable development or developing a model, working model of sustainable development over there. That is quite possible. Otherwise, the kind of resources which we are seeing over there, whether it is telecommunication, whether it is infrastructure, all those kind of promises are coming. And even the accessibility has increased. But given all these kind of things, I will put environment as a paramount concern. And somewhere, if we are actually understanding the impacts of Anthropocene, and we do appreciate that climate change is bringing the variety of disasters and risks to us, if we are not taking the concern or we are not taking the sustainable steps towards handling this newer playground, probably we are not carrying any learning from what we have done in last 100 years and so. So we need to bring best of the practices and somewhere intervene that yes, accessibility is perfectly fine, resources are there, but somewhere the mantra of sustainable development, not from the wetland, but from the way our cultures have always talked about. We need to bring that at the forefront. This is the simplest thing as an ecologist, environmentalist I can think of. I am not the strategic expert, and that is equally important, but these concerns should take, appropriate or the dominant places on the larger frame of architect policy. So thank you very much for listening to me, and he is all set for, answering your questions. So I welcome you all. Just identify yourself so that, along with Dr. Shishir, I also know who all are with us here, and let us continue with the discussion. Thank you very much.
Sensei Raj, founder Global Changemakers Network, former search and rescue, well, even now too, both on land and sea as well. So when you were uh, sharing about how difficult the elements are, I was literally transformed there. You know, I've been in Canada, I know the upper circles as well. I'll make a small statement and then I have questions for both you and the environmentalists as well. The Arctic's future balances on a knife's edge. On one side, trillions in untapped wealth, strategic sea lanes, and scientific knowledge. On the other, fragile ecosystems, indigenous livelihoods, and potential conflict. What do we choose? The first question is that, given that India is still working on its critical minerals and RE blueprint, which doesn't exist, I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on how India can play a role for itself within the two giants in that, number one. And number two is that how will the Arctic climate change affect India's monsoon and agriculture? Because this is a key aspect nobody wants to address. And me being a search and rescue mountaineer, I tell you, I don't have fear in my textbook, but I'm shit scared. Why? Because you're looking at the altering jet streams from the Arctic controls our global south climate. When a monsoon kicks in, when the other climate happens, and in that perspective, I would love to hear what goes on in that brilliant mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sakhuja and Professor Joshi for this enlightening lecture. I'm Subodh. I'm a research associate at Indian Council of World Affairs, and I look on Nepal and Bhutan. Since Professor, you mentioned about that anything happen in the Arctic has certain implications on Himalayas, and the smaller countries in South Asia, especially Nepal and Bhutan, they are like carbon neutral countries. They are like not damaging that much to environment, and they are like the Himalayan nations. So such kind of exploration in coming future is going to happen in Arctic, but these countries do not have any kind of voice, and they will not be allowed in like kisi bhi tarike se. So I just wanted to hear from you ki how do you see if there could be some kind of like, jaise abhi LDCs, they are like there's some forum in UN. If you're talking about some Arctic के problems को देखने के लिए there should be or there would be some different kind of setup and different kind of management. So would there be something related to the countries of like coastal island countries or the Himalayan countries, like LDC forum we have in UN structure? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was very academic to know about Arctic. But just for me understanding about the climate change, the whole issue for people to survive, this climate change is affecting every human, animal, all living creatures. The solution to climate change is in the eastern Himalaya. All seasons, all weather of the world is controlled by Antarctic and the Himalayas. Whatever comes back after hitting Himalaya comes to India, so we are benefited. That's why we have two crops, Kharif and Rabi crops. What goes over goes to Europe, what goes right goes to Australia, what goes left goes to all Western countries. Now, is it necessary for India to destabilize what is happening in Antarctic? This strategy, for academic reason, it's okay. India should focus more on Global South, which Prime Minister has been advocating. We have 40 years plus experience of whatever is happening in Antarctic. The snow is melting. Every time there is rainfall, every weather conditions is through Indian Ocean. So is it necessary to destabilize just because of trade and commerce closer to Russia? They are involved in that route and destabilizing and breaking that ice, making all kinds of melting, disturbing the whole lifestyle of the people. that we get no oxygen to breathe. So what do you do? So should India concentrate more on the climate change to see what things are around Himalaya? And the answer to climate change is on eastern Himalaya, not the western side of Himalaya, in the eastern Himalaya. So our saints and rishis who have known this strategy, and whether you call it geopolitics, whether you call it spirituality, whether you call it human life as such, everything that focuses on India, to my mind, I would like you to share what is the path that India should follow, even if they are talking the route for whether to transport oil, crude oil through that route. There is tectonic shift of these which is destabilizing, just a glacier melting. What is the priority for us to go for economy to Arctic when it is so far away? Why not India just focus on global south? That is what Prime Minister wants. If I can have your views on this.
Okay, so thank you for bringing these teleconnections. These are somewhat very important, and we have understood that this Arctic ice, this basically somewhere impacts the ISMR, Indian summer monsoon rainfall. And point number one, monsoons are very complicated. So giving a straightforward one answer is somewhat very difficult when it comes. But the kind of understanding which is present with simulations as on now, probably the peninsular India will not get much affected. However, the central India will have probably, I'm very cautiously saying probably, will have the larger impact in the monsoon cycles. So, because when we look at Tropic of Cancer, mid-latitude impacts which are over there, so those will be much more accelerated given when we lose ice over there. So we'll be able to see some kind of shift, but not across the country, and specifically not much on the Himalayas and peninsular India. Please. Oh, thank you. So nice of you. Thanks. And then when he was referring to, if I may just, my views on that, small nations and all. Given all kind of international alliances which are over there, whether it is Solar Alliance or other CDRI, India has very strategically and purposefully ensured that it will take care of small island countries which are not much represented when COPs are talked about. So I think, given its strategic position and its interlinkages with these small nations, probably India will be able to take their voices forward. So, and that is what I read it. But probably people who are good at policy analysts and all, they could speak more on this.
You're right, sir. India is the voice of Global South, and Professor Joshi has talked about sustainable development. It is included in the Arctic policy also, and our Dakshin Center is spearheading this activity, being the voice of Global South, not only being the voice, but also by empowering them with technologies which will help them to do sustainable development. And it's a fact of life. The climate change is there. So how to combat it, how to live with it, and how to do sustainable development is a part of, is a way of life, and which we have to learn all together, and India is a leading force in all this.
I remain conscious of this fact. If you recall, during my conversation with you, I kept talking about climate change, warming. These are going to be something with it's not all geopolitics or geostrategic, geoeconomics. We are not there kind of, as I said, the El Dorado, yes. But then there is a caveat one must come with: climate. I mean, in the sense that how far we want to exploit it. And I'm tempted to, recall this particular, the 6 pillars. I focused on only one pillar. One of the pillars, climate and environmental practices. the policy is not oblivious of the fact that there is a huge thing called as climate change, global warming, sustainable development. Whole lot of issues are very much, I think the authors of this policy have taken into consideration large number of verticals or interdisciplinary approaches. I touched only a small little portion of it. So you would find that it is very, very important to juxtapose everything that we talk about. You can, okay, prefix with climate or suffix with climate. It's how, or where do you come from? Which school do you come from, literally? What kind of policy you come from, on an academia, or for that matter, travelers. Sir, you mentioned about, you've been that far into those latitudes. I recall one naval officer, Captain Dham. This captain has been to the South Pole. He's been towards up north. He's also been to the third pole. So unique. And then, of course, the whole tourism part of it, continues in there. That's the fascinating. It brings in. We'll start seeing, as a matter of fact, first of a few days from now, the cruise liners will be making a beeline, dime a dozen. And there are, I just wrote an article, I think it appeared day before, where I start with the tourism season has begun. But then, again, the shipping companies or tourist companies, these leisure cruises, etc., they remain very, very conscious of the environment part of it. They're also, with the very fact that they better be careful, search and rescue doesn't come easy. It is going to be an expensive proposition, not financially, but purely in terms of the human lives, their own reputation. So they remain, climate remains very much. It is something that will be there with them. I think there is a huge interconnection. Particularly when the policy, one looks at it. I think when I mentioned in terms of, you're talking about, there's a pillar called national capacity building. So I alluded to that. Then we are talking about governance and international cooperation, Arctic Council, you're an observer. Of course, you have limited kind of scope to, act or respond or make your voice. It'll be great to see if we can bring in Global South. And that brings me to the question about the Terai region, or for that matter, this side of the Himalayas. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going through a very, very difficult time. Arctic is melting, it's warmer. The Chinese side of the Himalayas, the glaciers are melting faster. That Tibet-Qinghai region is now literally going through a very difficult time in terms of, they built so much of infrastructure. All this while we said the Chinese have an advantage in terms of the plateau, right? Now they must also look at the kind of permafrost, the melting is taking place, the whole military infrastructure, all that is going to be looked at very, very carefully. For them, in the upper, you talk about Inner Mongolia and other areas, again the same issue. Their infrastructure is, I think it's on a weak wicket with this warming. And that brings me, our own Himalayas, how it is going to affect us, Arctic melting the other side. I think that's how if I'm not an environmental scientist, but hermetically, on either side of this whole rocky patch, if that one melts, obviously this will melt. One ice tray, not in the freezer, and the other one, you can well imagine what it is going to, it's like an ice tray. And that's where what brings me in is that we are talking about is there a connection between the Ladakhis and the Inuits? Same geography, livelihood, eating habits. That brings in zero carbon, sir, you mentioned about, in terms of that so-called, how do Bhutanese can be bringing in a wave of sort of a kind of a, let's say, an idea that some countries who are also affected by the Arctic, can we be the stakeholder? Can we also occupy the high table in the Arctic Council? We have a voice. It's up to them to now start thinking about. I remember attending, I think it was somewhere in Finland, I was attending a seminar and we were talking about the communities. And that's where we found the Ladakhis and them. I think there is another, he's a Ladakhi guy who's built that glacier he melts, I forget his name. But then this is how they are talking about that wave is Devyasa, Sonam Wangchuk. Now, there can be, I'm sure there will be somebody, Sonam Wangchuk in Bhutan too. Right? But we look at Bhutan from a very narrow, but start looking at from the geography that they're in terms of the ice, the snow, etc., etc. Nepal for that matter, Ladakh. I think this is a kind of a beyond India, Nepal, Bhutan joining hands together, finding, say, we got to be sitting on the high table there. We are going to be talking about climate change. We are going to be talking about, because Himalayas, we are on this side, and the so-called lakes, glacial lakes, they melt. And we've seen one in Uttarakhand, I think happened a couple of years ago. I think we must be now conscious. And that's why the voice will come. They have a very, very important role to play over there, sir. Maybe they should talk about a Himalayan economy. Why not? I mean, that's how it will be. That's why a white economy, when I said it is not just the Arctic, the higher latitudes, it was also in the mountain economy, white economy. There it all comes in. And of course, again, Global South, everybody is going to be impacted by climate change. Everybody, because Arctic is going to be getting impacted by climate change, so obviously there will be some kind of impact and effect on even the Global South countries in the lower latitudes, particularly around the equator. It will be again felt in those measures. And so we remain, while I talked about geopolitics, geostrategic issues, as a student of international relations, I remain conscious of the impact of climate change on all these three. I can box on here, but I can't box on with the climate. So when we play our game in those many terms, I think we'll be very careful. Where is climate conducive, climate change giving me some kind of critical ballast that I go and get into the business, then say, no, hang on, climate change doesn't permit you. Maybe we can have the second round.
I think all of you look satisfied. If there are any more questions, then we can thank. Yes.
I am Gautam Sen, a retired civil service officer. My point was that notwithstanding the Arctic Council being there, do you, the speakers, all of them can address this question, that is the UN or its specialized agencies playing an effective role on the issues which are, of current concern?
Hi, I am Kiran, and I would like to know Professor Sakhuja's view on how much do you think that Great Nicobar Transshipment Project fit into this picture, and if it does fit in, then my question to Professor Joshi would be, if this is our first step, then how can we be optimistic about environment and sustainability?
Thank you. Well, sir, UN is not a bystander. It is watching the developments over there. And the very fact that I mentioned to you about International Maritime Organization, which is an arm of the United Nations, they are very much aware of what the developments are. Then there are also issues of human development, which very much feature in their programs. So there is, for me, as I read into the various literature which comes out of the United Nations, there is very much a voice of if Arctic was an entity, there is a voice within the United Nations amongst various its arms. I won't be able to list out which all is doing, but suffice to say, I think there is a voice available in New York on this. The second issue is about GNI. Ma'am, you've raised a very, very sensitive issue. It's like, again, environment, of course, Prof, you will take on. Well, it's an opportunity to, and I recall my time in the Andaman Nicobar, but I'm talking about 1980s. I was there for 3 years, and having now that whole Indra Point, the thing has changed after the tsunami, and having touched Campbell Bay many, many years ago, it was a fascinating, pristine in those many terms. But we are talking about building this. But then these days, if you see, I try to relate, during my research on this, I try to relate it. Can I look at Hawaii, for that matter? Offers you a great example. Is there something to be drawn from there? Island, middle of the Pacific, how did they go about doing it? There's a military base, right? Here it is more of a commercial. I'm not suggesting that, of course, that is Campbell Bay. Campbell Bay has got a naval establishment, I guess. I forget the name. Kavrati is on top, I think. Yeah, there's an air base there. But then you can see models available, right? And I'm sure the policymakers may have made a good note of it, the environment. After all, I guess in our system, the file runs through multiple agencies who are experts in their own domain. I don't doubt that. So I think a considered view, as we would call it, would have been taken. I'll stop at that.
We probably will have to look at it. How does the third pole, venture out in the coming years or decades, for that matter? Because what kind of floods will happen? The Indo-Gangetic plain. We in the Indo-Gangetic plain right now will have to be very, very carefully looking at what's happening over there in the Arctic, because we will see, flash floods we are talking about, glacial lakes melting, and the impact of climate change. There is certainly, I recall a report coming from one of the Indian think tanks, or from the ministry itself, when they said that there is an impact on the monsoons by the Arctic melting. So if you just extrapolate all that, I think no geography for that matter will be left as in their own comfort zones, right? Bay of Bengal surely is going to be. We are seeing that the kind of intensity, the frequency of the cyclonic developments in the region, Bay of Bengal particularly, and Andaman Nicobar being right in the middle, if you see, right, it is going to get impacted. But then, I don't have a scientific evidence to suggest to you that, well, I see that. But I look at GNI both as an opportunity, but with a word of caution. That'll be good.
That's where Professor Joshi mentioned that there should be modeling, there should be studies, and constant modeling is the process which has to be done, and it's a natural phenomenon. So if you see the Holocene curve of rising or sea levels, and you date it back 10,000 years back or 8,000 years back, you can see that it is not today's humanity, but the sea curve has been going up and down as it is if you date back to 10,000 years or 8,000 years back. So it's a natural phenomenon, and what we need to do is to model it, be aware about it, and do sustainable things. So with that, I would like to thank our two esteemed experts in a very traditional way. And in a very traditional way, we would like to just honor you. And these are all both very sustainable